Hi, this is Simon Obstall and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion, and today we're going to be forging a logo out of molten metal. So lots of fun techniques involved here, so let's get started. So for this project I'm going with 1920 1080, 24 frames a second and a duration of 10 seconds. First thing I'm going to do is come over to the library generators, bring in a color solid and make it black. Then I'm going to come and add object generators and I'm going to look for lens flare. I'm going to click on this main color here and let's make it a nice sort of warm yellow like that, and let's pump up its intensity. So then I'm going to close that down and I'm going to make a new group, and I'm going to select my text tool and I'm going to type any character that I want. So I'm going to go with S and I'm going to have a nice large size, center align it, center it up here, and then just adjust its baseline till we're sort of pretty much centered like that. Then I'm going to come down and select the circle tool, and holding down the Shift and Option key, I'm going to draw out a circle like that. And I want this to be, I think, 360, something like that. So come over to the style, turn off the fill, turn on the outline, and let's have a width of something like 35. Then I'm going to make some lines that sort of radiate off this. So I'm going to come down and select the line tool, and let's start with one at the top here. So from roughly here, I'm going to draw out all the way over here, make it nice and long, and then let's go down here and draw that one out. Again, make it nice and long like that. And let's come to the other side. From roughly here, let's draw one to there. Now you'll notice I can't actually go beyond the edge of the screen there, and I'm going to have to fix that in a second. And then let's have one that crisscrosses it and goes down like that. So if we zoom out, select the transform tool and turn on the overlays, you'll see these two lines. These ones extend a nice long way, but these two just end there. So I'm going to come over to the geometry and do a quick fix here. Point 2 is the one we need to adjust, so adjust the X and the Y like that, and do the same thing with the other one. Come to the geometry, point 2, adjust the X and the Y like that. So these are nice and long, and you can see they're extending well beyond the edge of the frame, which we need for our camera move. So then I'm going to grab all 4 of these lines, come to style and fatten them up. Let's go for something like 25 on the width. Now they sort of slightly intrude into the inside of the circle, and I quite like that. I'm going to exaggerate that. So let's come to position and just push them in like that. Just going to make it a little bit more interesting when we kind of add the final touches. Then I'm going to select the group and add a whole bunch of filters to it. So first of all, I'm going to come to blur and Gaussian blur. I'm going to add color and levels. Next one is a little bit of an interesting one. It's stylize and relief. So at the defaults, it looks crazy. I'm just going to zero out these 2 back positions like that for the time being. I'm going to have a back size of 0.95, and let's just pump up the fuzziness all the way. And we'll come back to this later on, obviously. So the next thing I'm going to do is come to filters and stylize and indent. And finally, I'm going to add another color levels. So let's try to make some sense of all of this. Let's come back down to the Gaussian blur, and I'm going to come to the first frame, and I'm going to set a keyframe for the amount, and the amount is going to be 100 there. And then I'm going to come forward to frame 180, and I'm going to set that amount down to 64. Come to the last frame and set it down to 24. And then I'm going to come to the next levels up, this one here, just above the Gaussian blur. I'm going to switch from RGB to alpha, and I'm just going to kind of bring in these 2 values like this until the kind of blurriness goes away. So actually let's do it on the first frame like that. And you can see that the blurriness has gone away, but we've actually got this nice sort of melting effect. You can see it here with the letter, and it sort of gradually dissipates like that. It'll be more obvious once we've set up the rest of the effect though. So next let's look at the indent filter, which is where it's all going to start happening. What we're going to do is have maximum softness, so softness of 1, brightness of 0. Let's go for an ambient of around 0.2. The highlight brightness, we want 3. The highlight sharpness, we want 7. And let's come down and just set that depth up to 20. So then I want to come back to my text object and just give it a little bit of extra attention. So come to appearance. I'm going to turn on the outline and I want to make that white. And I want to keyframe the white of the face. So let's make sure we're at the first frame. Let's hit a keyframe for the face color and 100% is good. And let's come forward to 100 frames and let's just dial this back a bit. So you'll notice that as I do so, we get this kind of scooped out concave look. So something around 75% is going to be good. So then I want to add some extra elements into this main model. So I'm going to duplicate this circle, right click, duplicate, and I think I'm going to bring it up to the top like that. What I want to do is I want to increase the outline quite a bit. So let's go for something like, I don't know, 85. And then we also just want to reduce it so it's not larger than the main circle. So let's bring down that radius like that. So like something like 300 is probably good there. And then what we're going to do is come over to style and we're going to animate the first point offset. So making sure we're on our first frame, let's set a keyframe for the first point offset and set that to 25%. Let's come forward to 100 frames and set that up to 100%. So now that's going to sort of gradually fill in like that. And then we're going to duplicate this. So right click, duplicate. We're going to rotate it through 180 degrees. So 180. And we'll come back to that first and last point offset. And if we just adjust this last point offset, that's probably going to be fine. We don't need to keyframe it. Just set that to 75%. And it's just going to sort of animate in a slightly different way from the other one. And to make this a little bit more gloopy, I'm going to select the first circle and I'm going to come to filters and blur and radial blur. And let's have an angle of something like 64. And let's hold down the Alt or Option key and drag it onto the other circle. And just kind of softens off the profile a little bit. So there's an extra element that I want to add, and to do that I'm going to take this circle and duplicate it again and just move it up to the top of this group. I'm going to turn off outline and I'm going to turn on fill, and I want to keyframe its radius. So I'll come to the first frame and set a keyframe, and let's just bring that radius down till it's sort of still overlapping those other circles. So maybe go for 250 on that, and then come forward to frame 100 and set that radius down to 0. And the overall effect of that is we get this fairly sort of complex looking demelting effect. So the next thing I want to do is add a light, and I don't want it to affect this background group here. So I'm just going to take this group and turn it to 3D. And then we can add our light, and you can see the background group stays 2D, but this one is lit. So the default light is actually doing pretty much what I want it to do. It is flattening everything off a bit, but that's exactly the look I want in this case. And you'll notice that if I adjust the intensity of the light, it dramatically affects the look of everything. Let's just set it to its default, except that we're going to reduce the fall off down to 0. So the only other thing I want to do before we move on is just come to the fat circle that sits over the top of everything, come to its style. Actually, let's come to sort of here so we can see this a little bit better, just at the beginning. And I'm going to adjust its fill color. So click on this, and I'm just going to nudge that back, and you can see that as I do so, it kind of pushes that circle further back and creates a little bit of depth in relation to the others. So I'm liking the look of that, and it just gives us a little bit more interest like so. So finally, I want to come to the levels here, this one at the top. And the point of this one was just give it some color. So let's come to the blue and just reduce that till we get a nice sort of gold look. And let's come back to the RGB and let's just punch everything up a little bit more black, a little bit more white like that. So next it's time to add a camera and explain what this relief filter is going to be doing. So let's add that camera, and let's also add behaviors, camera and sweep, and let's have a start value of -25 and an end value of 10. Now this looks pretty hokey because it's completely flat, but with our relief filter we can make it look a little bit more interesting by linking the back position to the camera's rotation. So let's do that. So let's open up the X, right click, add parameter behavior link, drag the camera into the source there, and then select properties, transform and rotation Y. Now that looks absolutely terrible, but we need to do a couple of things. The first is that we need to switch the apply mode to add to source, and then we need to set the scale to 0.5. And it's not going to look quite like anything just yet, but I think you can hopefully see that there's this sense of a sort of more 3D depth to the object. And when we add the next layer, it'll be very obvious. So I've renamed this group as background gold. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything that's inside it and put it into a group of its own. So come here, make a new group. This group wants to be 2D. So I'm going to grab everything and put it into that new group, close that group down. And what I'm going to do is make a clone of this group. So right click, make clone layer, and I'm going to drag it out to make a new group above everything else. And I've called that new group foreground silver. So then we're going to take the filters from this group, all bar the relief, so disable the relief, and we're going to copy them onto this foreground silver group. So hold down the Alt or Option key, drag them onto that new group like that. So I think you can see that this is now starting to take shape a lot better, and we're getting more sense of that being 3D. So what we're also going to do is we're just going to change the color. So come into this top levels here, and we want to undo that correction we did with the blue, and maybe just come to the red and reduce that a little bit like that, or actually probably reduce it a lot. And then also just do a very slight tweak to the green, not too much, something like that. And that's kind of just giving us a nice sort of contrast with the background. So another thing I want to do is to get rid of this sort of plasticky look and give it a little bit of texture. So to do that, I'm going to come over to the library and generators, and I want to look for noise, and I'm going to bring that in above that foreground silver like that. I'm going to right click on the noise, I'm going to add image mask, and I'm going to use that foreground silver as the source for the image mask, and we need to turn the group back on again. So then I'm going to come to the blend mode for that noise and switch that to multiply, and I'm just going to dial back the opacity to something like 50%. And what that's doing is it's just giving us, let's zoom in so you can see, it's giving us this nice texture here. 50 is probably a little bit too much, but I just kind of exaggerate it so you can very clearly see it. Let's dial that back to about 40, I think. And I've renamed that group as noise. So let's just close down that gold group. But inside this silver group, we're going to make some drops that fall off the model. And to do that, we are going to select the circle tool. Holding down the Shift key, we're going to draw out a small circle like that. Come to geometry, set the size to something like 25. You can see that's created a sort of little droplet there. I'm just going to turn off the camera while we set this up, and I want to move this out so it comes from somewhere interesting. In actual fact, let's do that with the transform tool. I'm going to just move that to there, I think, that sort of intersection. And then I'm going to come to behaviors and simulations and gravity. And the gravity is obviously going to drop it down in a nice kind of organic way. So I'm going to set that gravity value to 250. And now you can see that the drop falls off like that quite nicely. So it's happening a little bit too soon because I really want it to sort of happen around here. So I'm going to select that circle layer and just move it along so it starts at around that point there. And now it sort of drops off like that. That looks quite nice. And I'm going to duplicate this. So right click, duplicate. Let's turn the camera back off again. While we set this up, turn back on the transform overlay. Let's just move this one out to maybe that other side there, just where that intersection is. And let's just move it along a little bit further so it's not happening at the same point as the other one. In actual fact, we now need to adjust its Y position. It should be starting there. If I go to the start of it, you'll see how that works. You can see its path there, in fact. So we get that, and then this drop, and then the other drop, and that's nice. And I'm just going to have one more, and I want that to fall from the bottom of the S and through this outer ring here. So right click, duplicate. Let's just adjust its position. I'm going to do that using the X there, like that. Hopefully you can see the top of this path here. And I'm just going to want to line that up with the bottom of the S there. So now that's dropping like that, and that's pretty good. But I want it to happen later still, after the other two drops have gone. So move it along all the way to sort of about there. And then that's dropping out like that, and that's pretty good. So each of those needs a fade in. So I'm going to use behaviors, basic motion, fade in. We don't want a fade out time, but we do want a fade in time of, say, 10 frames. So holding down the Alt or Option key, drag that onto the other two circles. So now the effect of that is that we get this circle nicely appearing, that circle appearing, and then that one dropping out as well. And these are actually looking pretty nice, I think. If you kind of just go to there, you see that that's sort of detaching in a very kind of gloopy, drip-like way. So let's make this a little bit more interesting. Let's turn back on the camera. I'm going to make a new group at the top of everything, and I want this one to be 2D, so not affected by the camera or the lights. And I'm going to bring in a new lens flare, so generators lens flare, and I want to position this so it's just off the bottom of the frame like that. Again, let's make it kind of nice and warm like that, maybe a bit more red this time, like so. So we're kind of there, and let's crank up its intensity quite a bit. Don't think I want that streak. I think I'm going to turn that off and turn off the ring radius. I think I'm just going to also increase its size like that. I think that's going to be good. So then I want to create a little bit kind of smoky texture. So I'm going to come to Add Object Generators, and I'm going to look for Clouds, and I'm going to set its blend mode to Screen. And I'm going to come into the generator, open up the gradient, select this white, and I'm going to make it nice and dark. So like that's about 4% black there. But you can see that that just gives us a little bit of a hint of atmosphere in there, and that helps things. And then I'm going to duplicate these clouds, right click, duplicate, and I'm just going to switch the method to turbulent, and that just kind of gives us a slightly different look. And I'm going to knock back the opacity of this to something like 30%. So it's really subtle. But those two together just do give us a little bit of sense of atmosphere. Then I want some sparks that are kind of firing off random in the background here. And I'm going to add another lens flare to do that. So generators lens flare. And let's make this a little bit yellow. And let's increase its intensity way up. We don't want any streak intensity, and we don't want any radius like that. I'm just going to move it over on X so you can see what it's looking like. I think it's a little bit too big, so we want to reduce the size down like that. So I'm going to reset that X center, and then we want it to be kind of firing off at random around the frame. So I'm going to add a randomize behavior, right click, add parameter behavior, randomize to that center position. I'm going to set the amount to 0.9, and I'm going to set the apply mode to add and subtract. And now you can see that it's kind of firing off all over the place at random. And then I'm going to come to its opacity and also randomize that. So it's far less frequent. So add parameter behavior, randomize. And this time we want to set the apply mode to subtract only, and the amount to 500. And then it's only going to fire sort of fairly sporadically rather than all the time. But what we can then do is we can duplicate this. So right click, duplicate, and we can come back into the behaviors and we can just click on these two random seeds so they're different. And now we get those two firing off randomly in different positions. And I think that's kind of good enough for our purposes. And I also want a kind of big flash at the beginning. So I'm going to take this lens flare here and I'm going to duplicate it, move it to the top of the group there. Let's just change its color like this, I think. Let's set its size up to 3000. Let's reset that Y position. Let's also just reduce its fall off down to maybe 0.5. So we've got this nice burnout here. And let's keyframe its intensity at frame 1. Click on the keyframe there. And maybe also click on the size as well. Let's step forward to something like 50 frames and let's set the intensity down to 0 and also maybe just reduce that size as well to 1500. And now we get that sort of burst at the front there. We need it to die down a lot quicker. So I'm going to come to the intensity, right click, show in keyframe editor, and I'm going to set the interpolation of both of these to Bezier. And then I'm going to grab that first handle and sort of drag it down like that. And that's going to just make it reduce in intensity very quickly like that. There's one other thing I want to do before we add a little camera move, and that's this circle here, the one that's sort of in the middle. Let's dive back down into our background gold and into this group here and find where that circle is. It's this one here. And what I want to do is come to the radius here. And again, just do a bit of work on the keyframe editor. Let's hide that lens flare intensity. Let's drag around these radius keyframes and set them to Bezier. So we're going to do the opposite thing here, is that we wanted this to hold a little bit longer. So I'm drawing around that end. There's two end keyframes and making the profile look a bit like that. So then that'll die away faster and hang on for longer. Just a little bit better, I think. And finally, I just want to add a camera sort of crash in there. So I'm going to select the camera, come to the first frame, open up the transform position, set a keyframe for the X and the Z, step forward to 10 frames, set another keyframe for the X and Z, come back to the start, set a Z keyframe so we're really kind of close, so that's sort of negative 1200 or something, and just move it over on X till we're centered up like that, so sort of 500 I think looks about right. So then we get this sort of crash back like that. So I think we're pretty much done, and the only thing I want to point out is that because this is all procedural, we can come back into our original master group and we can select our letter, and we can in fact change it to anything we want. So there's Q, there's Z, and you can see it's all working just fine. And you could even in fact put a logo into there if you wanted as well, or change up to any of these shapes to whatever you want them to be. So anyway, that's the effect. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks very much indeed for watching. See you again soon.